It was not a treat. It was a moisture management system invented by someone who had already ruined one too many batches of cookies. Some women used apple slices. Some used a piece of bread. All of it worked. None of it was ever written on the canister. Trick number 24. Hanging dishcloths in the sunlight. A damp dishcloth left in a pile turns sour in 12 hours. Anyone who has ever picked up a kitchen cloth and recoiled from the smell knows exactly what that means. The solution required no product, no gadget, and no money. You hung the cloth on the line outside and let the sun do it. UV light from the sun is a natural disinfectant. It bleaches stains, kills bacteria, and leaves fabric smelling like fresh air. Grandmothers did not know the science. They knew the result. A sour dish rag was considered a small embarrassment in 1955. We have simply lowered our standards. Trick number 23. Waxing cheese to make it last. Before shrink wrap existed, housewives preserved blocks of cheddar by dipping them in melted paraffin wax. The wax sealed the outside completely, keeping moisture in and mold out for weeks, sometimes months. Farm wives had been doing this for generations before refrigerators existed. Suburban housewives in the 1950s carried the tradition forward because freezer space was precious and wasting cheese was simply unthinkable. You would open a pantry in 1957 and see wax-sealed wedges lined up like little soldiers. Red and yellow. Every single one labeled. Today, we throw out moldy cheese and buy another block. They kept it for a month and used every last crumb. Here is what I want you to notice. Not one trick on this list required buying anything. Not one of them required a special gadget, a branded product, or a trip to a specialty store. Every single one of them required knowing something. And that is the thing we lost. Not the tools. The knowledge. We traded knowledge for equipment. We traded skill for convenience. And now we pay $30 for a device that does one specific thing, when our grandparents solved the same problem with a jar and common sense. The tricks coming up in the next half of this list are the ones I think got lost the hardest. The ones nobody even thinks to search for anymore. If this video is already making you rethink your kitchen, subscribe before we keep going. You are going to want the rest of this list. Trick number 22. Potato slices to rescue oversalted soup. You have been there. The soup is almost done, you taste it, and your face falls. Too much salt. And a pot of soup that took 2 hours to build. Drop in a few raw potato slices. Let them simmer in the broth for 10 to 15 minutes. The potato absorbs the excess salt and mellows the whole pot. Fish out the slices and they go straight in the trash, having quietly saved your supper. This trick was in every church cookbook from 1940 to 1975. Then bouillon cubes and canned soups became common, oversalting became rare, and the trick disappeared. It still works. Exactly. Every time. Trick number 21. Toothpicks to test cakes. Before digital timers, before oven windows with lights inside, before reliable recipe bake times, the toothpick was how you knew if a cake was done. Push it into the center. If it comes out clean, done. If it comes out with wet crumbs, 5 more minutes. Some women used broom straws before toothpicks became inexpensive. Home economics teachers taught this in every classroom across the country. It is still the most reliable method for testing a cake in existence. More reliable than a timer. More reliable than looking at the top. It cost nothing in 1955. It costs nothing now. Most people have stopped doing it. Trick number 20. Jars and bottles as rolling pins. Not every kitchen in the 1950s had a rolling pin. But every kitchen had glass bottles and mason jars. A smooth glass Coke bottle, chilled in the ice box for 20 minutes, rolled pie crust perfectly. The glass stayed cold, which kept the fat in the dough from melting during rolling, which produced a flakier crust. Children watched in awe as their mother made a perfect pie crust with a ketchup bottle. Rolling pins eventually became standard. But the grandmother who knew a jar worked just as well, and sometimes better, was the one who understood what the tool was actually doing. Trick number 19. potato water for gravy. Every time you boil potatoes for supper, the water left in the pot is full of dissolved starch. That starchy water was never poured down the drain in a 1950s kitchen. It went into a jar on the counter. And that jar went into the gravy. Potato water thickens gravy better than cornstarch and adds a quiet, earthy depth that no powder can reproduce. Some women added it to their bread dough for a fluffier rise. Some added it to vegetable soups. Not one drop left the kitchen without purpose. Trick number 18. Flour sack towels for everything. When flour came in 50-pound fabric sacks, nothing was wasted. After the flour was gone, women washed the sacks, bleached them white, cut and hemmed the edges, and turned them into the best kitchen towels ever made. Flour sack fabric was tightly woven, incredibly absorbent, and lint-free. It dried dishes without streaks. It strained broth without tearing. It worked as a bread-proofing cloth. And it cost nothing. Some women embroidered the edges with flowers or roosters. Turning a flour sack into a kitchen treasure was a small act of creativity in a life that did not leave much room for it. Today, we buy overpriced, artisanal, kitchen towels from boutique stores. Our grandmothers made better ones from bags they would have otherwise thrown away. Trick number 17. Newspaper for grease and odors. Before paper towels were cheap and everywhere, this was the kitchen workhorse. Blot fried chicken or bacon strips on a sheet of newspaper. It absorbed grease faster and more efficiently than anything else. Line the trash with it before throwing away fish scraps. Pack crumpled sheets into lunch pails to absorb odors overnight. Line refrigerator shelves with it to keep them clean. No one would recommend ink-covered newspaper for food contact today. And they would be right. But the principle, that an absorbent, disposable, essentially free material can do the work of an expensive product, that principle was correct. We just upgraded the material. We forgot the lesson. Trick number 16. Ice cube trays for leftover stock. Every chicken dinner ended with the carcass going into a pot of water. 2 hours later you had golden, rich chicken stock. And in a 1950s kitchen, that stock was too precious to let go to waste, but there was never enough freezer space for a whole quart container. Pour the cooled stock into the metal ice cube tray with the pull-up handle. Freeze solid. Pop out the cubes and store them in a jar. Now you have perfect single-serving portions of homemade stock. Drop 2 cubes into a sauce. Drop 1 into a gravy. Drop 3 into a soup that needs depth. Kids reaching for what they thought were ice cubes occasionally got a mouthful of concentrated chicken broth. They did not make that mistake twice. I want to pause for a second because I think about this generation differently every time I research a video like this. These were not people with luxury. They had small freezers, limited pantry space, tight budgets, and no guarantee that next week's groceries would be easier to afford than this week's. And yet, they wasted almost nothing. They improvised constantly. They turned every leftover, every container, every pen dripping into the start of the next meal. They fed families on amounts that would not cover a single restaurant appetizer today. Not because they were magical. Because they paid attention. They knew their kitchens. They knew their ingredients. They knew what things actually did, not just how to follow a recipe that told them to. We are getting there. 15 more tricks. Drop a comment right now and tell me which one so far is making you think of your grandmother. Because I guarantee you, she knew half of these without thinking. Trick number 15. Storing bacon grease in a jar. This jar would have sat beside the salt and pepper on every American kitchen stove from 1920 to 1975. After frying bacon, the hot grease was carefully poured through a small strainer into this jar. It solidified at room temperature into a golden, smoky fat that went into everything. Green beans, cornbread, fried potatoes, pan gravy, biscuit dough. It was not an ingredient. It was the seasoning layer that ran underneath every other flavor in the kitchen. In the 1970s, cholesterol warnings drove it off most stoves. The jar got thrown out. And with it went the deepest, smokiest, most distinctly American flavor layer in the entire cuisine. You do not have to use bacon grease every day to understand why it mattered. You just have to taste a pot of green beans made without it, and then with it. One taste. You will understand everything. Trick number 14. Cast iron cleaning with coarse salt. In the South especially, cast iron skillets were sacred. Passed from mother to daughter like heirloom jewelry. And you did not, under any circumstances, wash them with soap. Soap strips the seasoning. The seasoning is the whole point. Instead, coarse salt. Pour it into the warm pan after cooking. Use a rag or half a potato to scrub. The salt scours out the stuck bits without touching the seasoned layer underneath. Then wipe it dry. Rub in a thin layer of lard or oil. Put it away. That skillet lasted a century because it was cleaned this way. The one in your cabinet is less than 5 years old, and already struggling because someone washed it in the dishwasher. Trick number 13. Celery in cold water to revive it. Limp celery was a kitchen disgrace in the 1950s. Celery went on every relish tray, into every casserole, stuffed with pimento cheese for company. Limp celery had no crunch. No crunch meant no texture. No texture meant the dish was not right. Stand the stalks upright in a glass of cold water in the refrigerator. Within 2 to 4 hours, the celery rehydrates completely, snapping crisp and fresh as if it just came from the garden. A glass of water and cold air. That was the whole solution. Kids remembered the sight of tall jars of celery standing in the fridge like sentinels, ready for after-school snacks spread with peanut butter. It still works perfectly. Almost no one does it anymore. Trick number 12. Vinegar to rescue a burnt pan. Every housewife had a favorite saucepan. And every favorite saucepan eventually got scorched. Oatmeal on a Monday morning. Gravy that sat too long. Milk that boiled over and stuck fast to the bottom. Steel wool would scratch it. Soap alone would not touch it. Pour in a mixture of vinegar and water. Bring it to a simmer. Let the acid do 15 minutes of work. The blackened bits release from the bottom in sheets. Your grandmother's pan came out shining like the day it was bought. This trick appeared in Ladies' Home Journal as a miracle solution. It is not a miracle. It is basic chemistry that anyone who pays attention to their kitchen eventually discovers. Trick number 11. Chilling the bowl for whipped cream. Whipping cream by hand in a warm kitchen is a battle you will lose. Fat needs to be cold to whip properly. Warm fat stays liquid. Cold fat traps air. Trapped air is the whole point. The solution: put the mixing bowl and the beaters in the ice box an hour before you need them. When the cream hit that frosty bowl, it thickened quickly, whipped up tall, and held its shape long enough to crown a chocolate pie at Sunday supper. Ready Whippin' arrived in the 1950s. Most women used it for convenience. The women who kept chilling their bowls never went back. There is no comparison between the two. Trick number 10. Bread to keep sugar soft. A slice of bread in the sugar canister. That is it. That is the whole trick. The bread absorbs the humidity that would otherwise bond the sugar crystals together. The sugar stays soft and scoopable. The bread dries out and hardens, but the sugar does not. You would open a sugar jar in 1957 and find a half-dried piece of Wonder Bread at the bottom. Not for eating. For the sugar. Ask a grandmother today how to keep brown sugar from turning into a brick. If she is from the right generation, she will look at you like the answer is obvious. Just put a piece of bread in there, honey. Works every time. Trick number 9. Wax paper as a kitchen hero. Long before parchment paper lined every baking sheet, before nonstick pans existed, before plastic wrap covered every bowl, wax paper did everything. Cookies slid off it without sticking. Sandwiches were wrapped in it for lunchboxes. Cheese slices stayed separated in the ice box with a square of it between each one. Women rubbed wax paper along refrigerator shelves to prevent rust. They pressed it over frosting to keep cakes smooth while setting. Reynolds advertised it as miracle paper. Most women just called it paper, because something that genuinely does its job does not need a fancy name. Trick number 8. String for perfectly sliced cake. We started with this. But it deserves the full story. Electric knives were uncommon in the 1950s. A regular blade dragged through a freshly baked layer cake, pulled crumbs, smeared frosting, and created something that looked like it had been attacked rather than sliced. The string solution: hold a length of kitchen string taut between both hands. Position it at the top of the cake. Pull it downward and through in one clean motion. The result was a perfectly even, crumb-free slice that looked like it came from a professional bakery. Some women used unflavored dental floss, pulled from the medicine cabinet, before toothpicks were inexpensive. Thrift and ingenuity occupying the same drawer. The string trick is still the cleanest way to slice a layer cake or a cheesecake in existence. Ask a professional baker. They know. Trick number 7, ice cube trick for deviled eggs. Deviled eggs were serious business in the 1950s. Church socials, bridge luncheons, 4th of July picnics. Your platter of deviled eggs was going on that table in front of everyone, and the presentation had better be right. But peeling hard-boiled eggs was a nightmare. Shells stuck. Whites tore. Yolks crumbled. After boiling, straight into an ice water bath. The rapid temperature change caused the egg to shrink very slightly inside the shell, creating just enough gap for the shell to slip off in clean pieces rather than stubborn flakes. Roll the cooled egg on the counter to loosen it further. Peel from the wide end where the air pocket sits. The difference between a pretty platter and a plate of egg salad. Trick number 6, pinch of salt in the coffee pot. Percolators bubbled on stoves across America every morning of the 1950s. Strong, bitter, dark coffee that sat on low heat until the last cup was poured. Bitterness was the enemy. And housewives had a one-ingredient solution. A pinch of salt added directly to the coffee grounds before brewing. Not enough to taste. Just enough to chemically suppress the bitter compounds that over-extracted coffee produces. It smoothed the flavor. Rounded the edges. Made the second cup as pleasant as the first. Folgers and Maxwell House preferred to talk about their mountain-grown flavor in their advertisements. Plenty of women quietly used the salt trick regardless, because they knew what their coffee actually tasted like without it. This trick works on modern drip coffee too. Try it once. Just once. Trick number 5, storing lettuce with paper towels. Iceberg lettuce. Wedge salads. Thousand Island dressing. The 1950s supper table knew exactly what a salad looked like. But keeping lettuce crisp in a pre-Ziploc world was a genuine challenge. Wash the leaves. Wrap them in a slightly damp paper towel. Tuck the bundle into the refrigerator. The towel absorbed the excess surface moisture that caused sogginess, while the dampness maintained just enough humidity to keep the lettuce from drying out. Lettuce stored this way stayed crisp for 5 days instead of 2. This trick was passed from neighbor to neighbor, whispered at bridge clubs, printed in Good Housekeeping advice columns. Today, we buy plastic clamshells of pre-washed romaine that last 3 days before going slimy. The paper towel method is still better. Trick number 4, freezing leftovers in coffee cans. Nothing in a 1950s kitchen was thrown away before being completely used up, including the container it came in. Soup, stew, spaghetti sauce, chili, casserole. All of it went directly into scrubbed, dried coffee cans sealed with the plastic lid, labeled with masking tape, and stacked in the chest freezer in the basement. When frozen solid, the food slid out in a neat cylinder. Into a saucepan. 30 minutes on low heat. Supper. This was recycling before the word existed. It was sustainability before it became a marketing angle. It was just common sense wrapped in an old Maxwell House tin. Trick number 3, mayonnaise and cake batter. I know what you are thinking. But hear this out. Mayonnaise is eggs and oil. Whisked together. That is the complete ingredient list. Now think about what eggs and oil do in a cake recipe. Binding. Moisture. Fat. Mayonnaise does all 3 simultaneously, and it does them better in certain recipes because the emulsification is already complete before it hits the batter. The result was cakes that were noticeably more moist, that stayed soft for days under a glass dome, and that could be made even when eggs were scarce. Chocolate mayonnaise cake and spice cake supreme appeared in church cookbooks and women's magazines across the South, described as foolproof. Ask a Southern grandmother about this trick and watch her face. She knows exactly what you are talking about. Trick number 2, mason jars as everything. The mason jar is the Swiss Army knife of the 1950s kitchen, and the list of its uses is longer than most people realize. Canning, obviously, but also storing leftovers, holding dry goods, mixing salad dressing, serving sweet tea, proofing yeast, carrying lunch, drinking cold milk at breakfast. A refrigerator in 1957 might have 20 mason jars inside at any given time. Leftover soup, pickled beets, homemade pudding, sliced vegetables, each one covered with wax paper and a rubber band. Ball and Kerr were the big names. Every family had boxes of them in the pantry. Today, mason jars are sold in boutique kitchen stores as vintage chic, at $5 each. Your grandmother would have laughed. Trick number 1, buttered burgers in the oven. Not everyone had a shiny charcoal grill in the backyard in 1955. And frying burgers on the stovetop left a splattered mess on a stove that was already working hard enough. So many housewives turned to the oven. Shape the patties. Line them on a baking sheet. Set a pat of butter right on top of each one. As the burgers baked, the butter melted slowly downward, basting the meat continuously, keeping it juicy, creating a browning effect across the top that smelled like a restaurant kitchen. Some women slipped a slice of onion underneath the patty. Some sprinkled a packet of Lipton onion soup mixed into the meat. Both tricks added depth that a backyard grill could not compete with. While the burgers baked hands off, a housewife could mash potatoes, set the table, fold a load of laundry, and still have supper on the table in 45 minutes. This is the one I want you to try this week. Tonight, if you have ground beef. Because I promise you, buttered burgers from the oven are better than most burgers you will eat anywhere. And your grandmother knew that before anyone else did. 30 tricks. Every single one of them invented by people who did not have our gadgets, our grocery delivery, or our 30-minute recipe apps, and who fed their families better than most of us manage on a Tuesday night. Here is what I want you to do. Pick one from this list. Just one. And try it this week. Maybe it is the butter on the burgers. Maybe it is the rice in the salt shaker. Maybe it is chilling your bowl before you whip cream for Sunday dessert. Try it. Then drop a comment and tell me which one you chose, and whether your grandmother ever used it. Because I read every single comment on this channel. And the ones that say, "My grandmother did this her whole life," are my absolute favorites. Share this with someone who needs to see it today. Because these tricks are not gone. They are just waiting for us to remember them. Subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. I will see you in the next one.